I didn't do any of this for convenience. I did it because of the stakes. I mean, it's not about what I'm going to go through as a person. It's what humanity is going through. What are the real consequences of the world the way it is, and the U.S.'s role as the largest empire in the history of humanity. My decision is not something that the different ruling elites in this country have ever accepted. You know, they've always chafed at it and done what work to try to disrupt it or to overturn it with either a constitutional amendment, which has come very close several times, or with a new statute.
Good morning. I'm here with Gregory Joey Johnson, who has seen his share of free speech civil rights litigation. Mr. Johnson was the defendant in the 1989 case of Texas v. Johnson, where a 6-year legal battle concluded in a 5-4 Supreme Court decision declaring flag burning to be a form of symbolic speech that could not be banned by the state of Texas. Mr. Johnson would later join a chorus of protesters on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, where he would be arrested again, and another 5-4 Supreme Court decision in U.S. v. Eichman in 1990 held that flag burning is protected free speech that cannot be banned by the United States. Recently, Mr. Johnson was arrested just after igniting a flag in protest at the Republican National Convention in Cleveland in 2016, an arrest that led to a civil rights lawsuit that Cleveland attorneys settled for a reported $225,000. Links to our video discussing that case in the description below. Now, Gregory Joey Johnson has announced a July 4th, 2019 protest at an undisclosed location in Washington, D.C. in a 4-minute video released on YouTube and tagged with hashtag July4BurnFlag. Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
So tell us a bit about what happened back in 1984.
Well, 1984, I mean, it was some years after the Vietnam War had subsided or concluded. And in 1984, I went to protest in Dallas, Texas, where the Republican National Convention was. Avakian had put great emphasis on internationalism, on standing with the people of the world, as I mentioned earlier, and on this orientation that the whole world comes first. And Reagan was, nowadays he's referred to this real avuncular fashion, but he was a monster. He was a war criminal. He committed atrocities against the people in El Salvador. He backed the death squads that murdered upwards of 70,000 people in the villages of El Salvador and the villages of Honduras and Guatemala. And Reagan was also a backer of the Contra mercenaries in Nicaragua. So if people want to understand, in fact, the immigration crisis that's going on the southern border today, much of it derives from the policies of imperialism or the acts of imperialism that Reagan was instrumental in implementing. So we thought it was critical that we go to Dallas, oppose the Republican National Convention. And I'm against the Democratic imperialists too. They're all fronting for the same system of global capitalism and imperialism and the American brand of it. Dallas was laid out like a modern Nuremberg rally with American flags all over the place. And, these conventions are very deliberately choreographed. And the whole theme of the Republican National Convention, the RNC in Dallas, was new patriotism, bringing back America prouder, stronger, greater. So there were flags draped everywhere. And we did a very defiant march through Dallas. And at the end of it, we got as close as we could to the convention center, and we burned the flag. And we said, red, white, and blue, we spit on you. You stand for plunder, you will go under. And I was arrested. I was tried and convicted and sentenced to a year in jail, a $2,000 fine. I appealed the conviction, and that was the beginning of a 5-year court battle all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was just that, a battle.
And that was the first time that the courts had established, especially the Supreme Court, had established that flag burning was symbolic freedom of speech.
It was the first time that there was a definitive ruling. If you go back and you look at the case history, you see in the 1960s, people were doing all kinds of things with the flag. They would sewing it as a patch on the seat of their pants. They were attaching peace symbols to it and flying it outside their dormitories. They were burning it. There's a
Hmm.
famous case in New York, Street versus New York, where a man named Street went out into the street, a black man, a veteran, and burned the American flag after the murder of a civil rights leader in the South. And his words were, "We don't need this damn flag. We don't need this damn country." And then he burned the flag, and he was arrested, and his case was going through the courts, but they couldn't actually determine, was he arrested for his speech, his actual speech, or was he arrested for his symbolic speech? So the case was thrown out. There have been these kind of precursors or test cases.
Right.
Mine was the first where there was a definitive ruling.
Bob Avakian was arrested for burning a flag in the 70s, right?
That's right. That's right.
So how much of your protest then was influenced by Bob's act there, or just in general his belief system?
Well, as I said earlier, his emphasis on internationalism. You know, we live in an imperialist country.
Mm-hmm.
It's parasitically and predatory. It has 700 military bases scattered around the world. It has a whole global system of exploitation and wealth extraction going on. It's backed up by military armadas, and there's millions and hundreds of millions of lives that are impacted by this on a daily basis, and billions of people in the world that suffer unnecessarily because of it. And so this whole thing that they throw at me about, you shouldn't do this, it harms the veterans, you know, you should thank them for their service. So I say, let's talk about their service. What are they actually doing in the world? They're being played, they're being used to wage wars of empire, wars of conquest, to carry out mass murders. I mean, you know, this is the United States of atrocities, as far as I'm concerned, and the United States of amnesia at one and the same. There's a million people that died in just the Iraq War alone. The series of wars, the series of sanctions and wars that the U.S. prosecuted against the people of Iraq, and it's like, what? That's so 15 minutes ago, you know.
Yeah.
People thinking about it, and understanding the consequences of empire. So it's been said, I've heard from different international friends, why is it that people that live in the belly of the empire are sometimes the last to know it's an empire, and it's doing these horrific things. So this is something that the flag burning is a dramatic way to bring it to people's attention. If someone has that much disgust, that much contempt for the symbol of the country, they're trying to say something. And the reason I think there's been repeated attempts to suppress it is because they don't want people to hear that kind of a message. They just want it to be Johnny Jingo, you know, when Johnny comes marching home, kind of a jingoistic message about it, expressing disgust or outrage against it, against these crimes of empire. The white phosphorus, the Abu Ghraib, the massacres of civilians, the night raids in the villages in Iraq and Afghanistan and Somalia, and a whole arc of countries in Pakistan, a whole arc of countries across the Middle East where the people have been bombed, invaded, tortured, occupied. People need to know about this and need to stop it. So that's what I'm about. And I'm part of a movement for an actual revolution, not just to express disgust with America, but to build to the time when millions of people would soon to put everything on the line to get rid of this system, to overthrow this system and its forces of repression, and bring into being a whole different society. And that's outlined in this book right here, The Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America. There's a draft, a proposal already on the table about how society could be radically different. We don't have to live in a world where this lopsidedness of the world, where a handful of countries and a handful of people within those countries, like there's 43 billionaires in the world that control more wealth than the bottom half of humanity, 3.5 billion people. And somehow that's the natural order of things. Like people used to think slavery was the natural order of things. Well, certainly a lot of the slaves didn't think that way, but you get my point.
And it didn't end overnight. It took constant pressure over a long period of time, didn't it?
That's right. And I wanted to say around this point about patriotism that you asking my influences from Avakian.
Sure.
This is a very important quote from the book called Basics from the Talks and Writings of Bob Avakian,
Okay.
which your viewers can find at the website revcom.us, revcom.us. And Avakian says in Basics, quote, if you can conceive of a world without America, without everything America stands for and everything it does in the world, then you've already taken great strides and begun to get at least a glimpse of a whole new world. If you can envision a world without any imperialism, exploitation, oppression, and the whole philosophy that rationalizes it, a world without division into classes or even different nations, and the narrow-minded, selfish, outmoded ideas that uphold this, if you can envision all this, then you have the basis for proletarian internationalism. And once you have raised your sights to all this, how could you not feel compelled to take an active part in the world historic struggle to realize it? Why would you want to lower your sights to anything less? So I think that says it in a very concentrated way.
It sounds like you still value many things that would be considered both American values and world citizen values. Can you speak a little bit about that? What is it that Joey Johnson values in his citizenry?
Well, I think those two things are in sharp contradiction.
Okay.
Because the point I said earlier about the whole world comes first from Avakian.
Okay.
I mean, patriotism by definition means love of country or your country first.
Okay.
You're thinking about it first, and that's problematic. That's a problem for humanity. I mean, right now we have that problem in this country where, you know, hundreds of millions of people are thinking America first. I mean, even when you hear people talk about something like global warming or climate change, they talk about it in terms of this is a problem for the national security of the United States. Even Bernie Sanders said that. That's really disgusting. It's, for number one, it's factually not true. Climate change is a problem for humanity. Humanity, for the existence, it poses an existential threat to our existence as a species, number one. And number two, it's disproportionately affecting what people refer to as the global south. It's one of the reasons there's more refugees, people having to flee their homelands from Africa, South Asia, the Middle East, because their countries are becoming unlivable, unbearable to remain in. So this is a problem for humanity. And we have to approach things from that standpoint. And one of the things that Bob Avakian has emphasized in looking at the revolutions of this last century and bringing forward a whole new synthesis of communism, a new communism, is that it's even been a problem in the socialist countries that have been established today, or that existed for a period of time, places like the Soviet Union and China, which still has up the signboard of socialism, but is a state capitalist or a capitalist country, is that if you make a revolution and you approach your revolution from the standpoint of putting your revolution first and putting it before humanity, you're already going in a very bad direction, because we got to be about emancipating humanity, the whole planet. And none of this whites first, none of this men first, none of this America first. It's humanity.
How about just a government by the people, for the people, as it was written in the U.S. Constitution?
Well, but the problem is for that, when you have a society that's divided into classes, you have to understand that democracy, you have to say, well, which class? Because democracy, going back to the Greek, means democracy, ruled by the people. But if you have a society divided into classes, you got to say what people. And in this society, it's clearly the capitalists and the imperialists that are ruling, have disproportionate influence over the wealth of society and over the political institutions, over the media, etc.
So after the Supreme Court decision in 1989, it appears there was a act of Congress. The Flag Protection Act went into effect at midnight, 28 October 1989. You were somehow arrested only 2 days later. What happened there?
Well, we saw the need to immediately defy the Flag Protection Act, this new federal statute that had been enacted and been sponsored by, take note, Joe Biden. So this suppression of flag burning as an expression of contempt for the government, it's like a quintessential form of political dissent. I mean, the whole thrust and purpose of the First Amendment really means nothing without protection of the right to dissent against the government, political speech against the government. And flag burning is a concentrated form of that. But there's been bipartisan efforts to suppress it ever since my case. And we're talking Republicans and Democrats. And George Herbert Walker Bush called for a constitutional amendment in response to the decision in my case, which shocked and outraged a lot and alienated a lot of people. They thought, whether you want to burn it, whether you want to waive it, but don't amend the Constitution. For many people, that's like a secular version of amending the Bible. And it was just kind of set off alarms with a lot of people. So here comes Biden with this new federal statute. And there's no getting around the fact that it would be in contradiction to the First Amendment, that it would be political suppression.
So what happened specifically? You went to the U.S. Capitol with 3 other people?
Yeah, I went to the U.S. Capitol with 3 other people, including one of them was a Vietnam veteran, and Dred Scott, the artist from Chicago, who did the extremely powerful and controversial art installation called "What is the Proper Way to Display the American Flag," in which he had an American flag on the floor, and then he had a podium on a stand where you could step onto the flag if you so desired and write what you thought was the proper way to display the flag. And then he had on the wall pictures of people in places like South Korea, Panama, what have you, burning the American flag or otherwise desecrating it, as they call it. And so those 2 people were with me. Another artist was with us. And we burned the steps on the flag on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. And that resulted it was what he called put on a fast track to the Supreme Court. And so there was a ruling several months later. And then some folks also burned the flag out in Seattle at the post office. And so those 2 cases were combined.
Okay.
Before the Supreme Court.
Now, you were arrested, but you were not charged.
Right, exactly.
How did that make you feel?
I was outraged.
You wanted to be.
I was outraged because I went there, I burned it, but they claimed my flag wasn't burnt enough. It's just ridiculous. I think they didn't want to go back to the Supreme Court with the same flag and the
same name.
Same name, exactly.
That's
too obvious. So they left me out.
Now, you had just been through, 5 or 6 years getting to the Supreme Court with your previous flag burning case. And I'm sure there was a lot of uncertainty and stress around that. And almost immediately, you planned this demonstration in which you maybe anticipated that you would probably get arrested for this. And so how did it feel to put yourself almost immediately back into a position where you could face another couple of years, potentially, fighting your way back up to the Supreme Court?
Well, I didn't do any of this for convenience or for, I did it because of the stakes. I mean, you have to understand, it's not about what I'm going to go through as a person, it's what humanity is going through. I mean, what are the real consequences of the world the way it is, and the U.S.'s role as the largest empire in the history of humanity, and they're horrific, and it's unnecessary. the starvation in the world, the famines, the wars for empire, the destruction of the global environment, which I guess I should add, the largest institutional consumer of petroleum in the world is the U.S. military, as part of enforcing this whole global exploitation and oppression. So I don't know. I thought that they were trying to take away the ruling in my case. That's obvious. That was the expressed or the explicit reason for doing this new federal statute. So it cried out to be defied. And I think this is a good time to fast forward to the present, because my decision is not something that the different ruling elites in this country have ever accepted. They've always chafed at it and done work to try to disrupt it or to overturn it with either a constitutional amendment, which has come very close several times, or with a new statute.
Here comes the Republican National Convention to Cleveland in 2016, and you were protesting with a flag burning there again, but you ended up being arrested. What was supposed to happen? Did you think you were going to get arrested, or what was supposed to happen?
Well, I thought there was definitely the possibility of it, because number one, the whole atmosphere around the RNC in Cleveland in 2016 was one of extreme belligerence and American chauvinism. Trump is the embodiment of that, of misogyny, of jingoism, of xenophobia, extreme xenophobia, the scapegoating of immigrants, just calling them criminals and rapists. And all that ugliness was on show at the RNC in Cleveland in 2016. And it was being spewed out to the people of the world. These conventions aren't just American affairs. They're broadcast globally. People see them.
How were you treated? Were you treated with care and grace and caution, or were you hit and beaten and spat on, etc.?
Well, what happened was, even though they were notified 2 days prior that I was the person, the named defendant, Texas versus Johnson, a landmark Supreme Court case that said we had the right to do exactly what I was about to do, they still came charging in with fire extinguishers and chokeholds. There's a photo of me being taken down in a chokehold. And then 16 of us were brutally arrested and taken to jail. And it took more than a year and a half to get the charge dropped against everyone. And it involved an evidentiary hearing in a misdemeanor case, which is unusual, an evidentiary hearing that involved the chief of police being put on the witness stand and another police commander, and them clearly contradicting each other. So this is what I think the city of Cleveland was fearful of coming out, the case had actually gone to trial, the civil case. So that's just why they settled for a substantial amount, nearly $250,000. And this is an indication of kind of what time it is. And look, Trump is fascist. He's fascist, and I don't say that as a pejorative. I say that as a statement of fact. It's not hyperbole. It's what he actually represents. Whether he's read Mein Kampf from cover to cover, I imagine he has. Not to critique it, but to internalize it. But whether he has or not, he's surrounded by people who are all about bringing into being a fascist form of rule in this country. And that's what they've done. And they're well on their way to consolidating. And I have this definition that we run on RevCom quite frequently. What is fascism? Fascism is the exercise of blatant dictatorship by the bourgeois, capitalist imperialist class, ruling through reliance on open terror and violence, trampling on what are supposed to be civil and legal rights, wielding the power of the state, and mobilizing organized groups of fanatical thugs commit atrocities against masses of people, particularly groups of people identified as enemies, undesirables, or dangerous to society. At the same time, and this can be seen through studying the examples of Nazi Germany and Italy under Mussolini, while it will likely move to quickly enforce certain repressive measures in consolidating its rule, a fascist regime is also likely to implement its program overall through a series of stages and even attempt at different points to reassure the people or certain groups among the people that they will escape the horrors if they quietly go along and do not protest or resist while others are being terrorized and targeted for repression, deportation, conversion, prison, or execution. And that's what's unfolding in front of our eyes, you know. And this is a really perilous time, not just in American history, but once again, American fascism is a threat to humanity, to the existence of humanity. I mean, Hitler didn't have nuclear weapons, and Hitler wasn't living at a time of global climate change, which we're under a regime who is denier of science, a denier of the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
Says global warming is just a curiosity among some.
Yeah, the train is on the tracks, so all we have to do is just let it take everybody out and not be in the way.
It's a very dangerous time, and we're saying all this as millions of immigrants, you know, are being driven by the workings of this system to leave their homelands, and thousands have come across the southern border as refugees. Now they're being told they have to stay in Mexico until all of a sudden the law. See, this is one thing, one of the characteristics of fascism is attacking the rule of law, either disregarding it, in the Supreme Court with fascists or fascist friendly, or Christian fascists in the case of several of the justices. This is a perilous time, and the belligerence, the threats against the people of Iran. This is a country of 82 million people, Iran is, and they're going to bed at night with B-52 bombers flying overhead, nuclear-equipped B-52 bombers, and a whole naval task force. And haven't we seen this movie before? Haven't we seen this, what the U.S. did to the Iraqi people in the last decade? It's a really dangerous time, and part of what I'm trying to do is to help to jolt people out of this and stop relying on the Democrats, because the Democrats are also one of the ruling parties of this country, and fundamentally they're about preserving the system, and they have real problems with what Trump's doing, real concerns, real outrages, but they're very determined to keep any attempt to change that or to alter the direction of society clearly within the confines of this system. And what we need actually is for millions of people to get out in the streets. I actually like what the people in Hong Kong are doing. It's righteous what they're doing to stand up against the Chinese phony communist regime and its threat to do extradition of people within Hong Kong into mainland China. I think the millions of people that have gone out into the streets in Hong Kong is a beautiful thing, and we should learn from it here.
What do you think prevents the American people? Is it apathy? Is it just everything's too far apart? We all have to get in our cars and drive and park someplace and then protest? Or what is it that prevents the American people from joining the Hong Kong style protests?
Well, ironically, I actually think it's connected with this thing I've been saying about the dangers of American chauvinism, that somehow America is this special place. It has this whole democratic tradition and values, and it
doesn't happen here.
Fascism couldn't happen here. So it's illusions, the same illusions that people have to think that whatever America does in the world, it does it with good intentions. You know, lead them to think that fascism couldn't happen here. Really? You know, in a country that was based upon slavery, you know, for several centuries, a country that was based upon white supremacy, male supremacy, you know, the theft of half of Mexico, you know, Jim Crow segregation, 5,000 lynchings. it can't happen here. Um, society can be convulsed backward, extremely backward, and the consequences of it. And this is, look, Trump is bringing out tanks on the 4th of July, for Washington D.C. For people who think that, he's like, we have these great tanks, yeah, and they want to show them, they want to show them to the world. This is the kind of thing that happens in countries where coup d'etats are about to come about. And as Michael Cohen, his attorney, said, if he loses the next election, he doesn't think he's going to respect the outcome. I mean, this is a really dangerous time. So instead of people just humoring themselves or laughing about it or making cynical jokes about it, they need to take it seriously, the direction that society is going in at a very rapid clip, and get out there and oppose it, and get out there and determined to stop it, and say you're not going to live this way. You refuse to live in a country where immigrants are being put in cages, like dog cages, where, a father and his daughter are washing up on the shore of the Rio Grande, having drowned to death. You're not going to stand for that. This is all being done in your name. They are concentration camps, and people want to quibble over. The point is in Nazi Germany, the concentration camps didn't start off as extermination camps. They started off as just a place where the Jews, after they were removed and placed in ghettos, then they were taken to the camps, the concentration camp. Things escalate, it develops, it intensifies. And this is a really perilous and dangerous time, as I said, not only for people here, but for humanity.
And so you're going to translate all of what you just said, all of what you stand for, all of what's wrong with the country in its place in the world, into something that, since people aren't paying attention to that, maybe they'll pay attention to you protesting with a flag burning. Is that about right?
I think the flag burning is a way to make a concentrated statement of condemnation. As I told the Washington Examiner, I don't do this on a whim. It's a serious condemnation of the system. I mean, if it wasn't so effective, I don't think there'd be so many attempts to ban it and to suppress it. And this July 4th in particular, the Revolution Club has put out a challenge. It's called July 4th, 2019. Imagine a world without America, a call to act. And it's from the National Revolution Tour and the Revolution Club. And people can find out more about it at the website revcom.us. But we are saying, I'll just share some of it with you. On July 4th, 1852, the great anti-slavery fighter Frederick Douglass said, "For revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival." So as we approach July 4th, 2019, when the American flag flies over concentration camps on the border, where children cry and even die, when the same bloody rag blesses the bombs and planes and troops that have murdered and mangled hundreds of thousands of children in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and dozens more countries in just the past decade, when it flies over the pens of mass incarceration and over 2 million people, mostly Black, Latino, or Native American, and it's sewn as a shoulder patch on the arms of the murdering police who send them there if the pigs don't kill these youth first, when it's pasted on the derricks that drill into the earth and destroy the environment, when it sits on the lapels of the legislatures who rip from women the right to control their own bodies, when it is waved by the shameless fascist Jack who struts as president and plans to bray and grunt a speech that day in Washington, D.C., we echo the words of Frederick Douglass and say, barbarity and hypocrisy, truer words were never spoken, whether back then, today, or all through U.S. history. And we echo and we stand with the leader of the revolution today, Bob Eichman, when he says, and then it's that quote that I read earlier in the program, if you can conceive of a world without America, imagine a world without America. And we're calling on people not just to conceive of it or to imagine of it, but to actively work for it, to find out about the revolution, and to take a stand on the 4th of July, to stand with the people of the world and to burn a flag where you're at or in some other way desecrate it. And make sure you share it on Twitter at Tune Into RevCom. And, find ways to popularize this. I understand people are going to do a flag burning on the West Coast down at the U.S.-Mexican border in San Ysidro. And I think that's very important. Traditionally, the 4th of July has been this nonpartisan celebration. Presidents don't speak at it. Not that I was into it then, because the U.S. was still an empire, imperialist country then. But my point is, though, is he's taken it to a whole nother level. He's arrogated the holiday to himself and made it about his political campaign and his fascist campaign in society overall. The whole point about bringing out the tanks and putting them on display and having flyovers with the Air Force One and fighter jets. This is all about creating an atmosphere. If this was happening in some other country, people would be alarmed and say this was like a naked display of militarism and who is it intended to be used against? And what I said earlier about these are the kind of things that happen when governments are instituting coup d'etats. This flexing of the military might.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's going on with this. And once again, people got to break out of the paralysis of thinking somebody up there, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders or whoever is going to ride in like on a stallion, on a white stallion and rescue us. They're not. They're locked into the
just like Obama did, right?
Exactly. No, was a representative of empire as well. They called him the deporter in chief. He was the drone bomber in chief. He did nothing about mass incarceration. When the black people rose up against the murder of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, he called them thugs. He didn't call the police that murdered Freddie Gray thugs. He called the black youth thugs. So yeah, just like Obama did. So anyways, I think it's important to say all that, to challenge people.
So obviously, Joey, you're very articulate. You can get across, your thoughts and opinions and values quite effectively. So what is it about flag burning that you feel that this is a prime way for you to express these things? Like, why not write a letter to your congressperson or whatnot? What is it about flag burning in particular?
Well, I mean, come on. It wasn't a serious question. Write a letter to my congressman.
that part might have been a little baity.
Yeah,
but,
a little baity. I mean,
obviously you're looking to make a larger statement than can be made with an ineffective letter to your representative, who you already have little faith in, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just that those channels have exhausted themselves a long time ago. The fundamental thing that exists in the United States of America is capitalism and imperialism and political structures to serve that system of capitalism and imperialism. It's not that the fundamental thing that exists in this country is democracy and the economic system serves democracy. No, it's the other way around. And so if those political institutions don't serve that underlying system, and the whole thing would come unraveled, the whole thing would. So the Congress and all that is an institution to serve empire, to serve the oppression of whole peoples, I mean, I just think that there's an abundance of evidence for that. We could have a whole program around that question, but that's the reality. So writing your congressman is just exercising complete futility. It's just, it's going to require an actual revolution, and there's a leadership the strategy for revolution. What's missing is millions of people who understand that that's what's necessary and are determined to carry that out. And we're working on it. We're actively working on that problem right now. The Revolution Club is the Revolutionary Communist Party. There was a tour that began on the West Coast in March called the Get Organized. It's time to get organized for an actual revolution tour. And there's much more you can learn about it on revcom.us. There's a very bold beginning, and the point is to actively recruit the thousands of people today. Just a few thousands of people can, as things sharpen in this society, can be part of influencing millions and bringing forward and organizing the millions that are needed for an actual revolution. So I'm part of that process. I'm involved in that process. But that's not the kind of things that the people who run this system want to popularize are going on, and let alone treat with any legitimacy. No, they want to marginalize it, discredit it. You know, the whole point around it. So flag burning is not the only thing I did. It's the kind of thing that does happen. It tends to break through in the media more because it is so such a sharp and pointed way, and poignant, I would say, way of making a statement against the system. And you know, and because I've been repeatedly, arrested for it and gone through legal battles around it. But I want to say too about, like, right now I'm living in Chicago, and I went there deliberately after Trump made his threat about federalizing the police in Chicago. And there's already been a slow genocide going on in this country against Black people, mass incarceration of police murder. And this is a threat to escalate that genocide. And so I've been in Chicago for the past 2 years, struggling with the young Black youth to get out of, like, slaughtering each other, get out of doing what the system wants them to do to each other, and stand up and fight back against the system and be part of this movement for an actual revolution. So that's what I'm doing.
So you talked about how the act of flag burning can sometimes penetrate the media a little bit more because the action is a little bit more shocking. So how do you feel when people pay more attention to the act of flag burning than to the issues that you're discussing about, injustice and violence and fascism and things like that?
Well, I don't think it has to stop there. I think it's not I think that once people see someone is dramatically challenging the legitimacy of the system, then you're on a whole new terrain. It opens up different vistas, of things to consider about. Well, they're disputing the symbol. Well, even if they're shocked or horrified for that matter, then there were millions of people in this country that at one point thought that segregation was completely legitimate.
Yeah.
That white supremacy was completely, quote unquote, reasonable. And it was through determined protest that was shocking and determined struggle, including not just the civil rights movement, but the Black Panther Party emerging on the scene. That kind of, in conjunction with other things happening, kind of challenged people to think about some of their preconceived notions. So I just think it doesn't stop there, for some people anyways, more people. And then I think also this is happening in the context of the system is doing things that are utterly shocking and outrageous, not just to people's preconceived notions, but in reality, or discussing and outrageous and harmful. I'm talking about once again the fascism of the regime of Trump and Pence. And if people need to wake up out of this stupor, as I said, and confront reality and go all out to stop it. And if that leads you to seeing that the whole underlying system of capitalism and imperialism is actually needs to be done away with, and pursue your convictions. There's risk involved in what we're doing here tomorrow. There's fascists that have come to Washington, D.C., There's white supremacists that have come here. And there is danger, there is risk involved. But we have to put humanity first. We have to act on what we understand and do it with conviction.
Well, it has been very nice to speak to you today, Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
You are a part of free speech history, and we are honored to be able to interview you today. We wish you a safe and a happy 4th of July protest in your case, and we hope that no one has to spend the night in jail or worse, if that's a proper send-off for a protest.
Okay.
But thank you again, and wish you the best to you and yours, of course.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.